Good morning. Thank you for attending the publications training and workshop. My name is Jill Weller, and I am the training grant analyst, and I work in the Health Sciences Research Service Corps. And we've teamed up with the UCSD Library and Karen Heskett, who's a librarian here on the campus, to bring you this presentation. We're hoping that it's informative. This is a test training, and we're hoping to do training in the future for academics. This one is primarily for admin assistants in the publication process. So I'll go ahead and get started and show you the presentation outline, do some purpose and objectives, publication, some overviews, statistics at UCSD. Karen will then talk about the scientific literature landscape, the NIH public access policy, and then we have a couple demonstrations on submission methods, which is A, B, C, and D. We have tools for managing the publications, which is your My NCBI and My Bibliography. And then the last demo I will be doing, which is the NIH progress reports and how publications are reported in the RPPR. And then we'll go over some resources, and we'll show you the website where all this will be posted in the future. So, the purpose of today's workshop is to educate research administrations on how to provide support, support to your researchers regarding publications. So that could be not just your PI, but it could be postdocs, it could be project scientists, anyone that's working in the lab that's doing a publication. So I'd like to use this little visual here. We're doing research here, which hopefully we are publishing that research, and then part of the whole NIH public access policy, it has to go out to the world and has to be open access. So hopefully here at UCSD we are changing the world. Some more of our goals and objectives today. Something that's not on here. The biggest goal is to know the resources on campus. I think that's half the battle when you are trying to figure something out and you don't know who to contact. And Karen is the best resource for this, so we just want you to know her name and have her on speed dial. Hope she appreciates that. So we want you to understand the requirements of author manuscripts and know which publications require a PMCID. Again, that's tying into the whole public access policy. And then we want to review the My NCBI and My Bibliography and how to manage compliance in your My NCBI for your ERA Commons and your RPPR. So a lot of information to take in, but that's why we have this video and we have the PowerPoint online, so you can come back and refer to things. I thought this was an interesting quote. If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants. I thought that was a good forward-thinking, knowledge is power type of quote. So that's basically what we're doing, right? We're advancing science and to improve human health. So I wanted to go over and look at the big picture at UCSD. So how many journal articles were published in 2016 by UCSD authors? And it's about 8,000, and that's just from one database. So we know that there's more than that. And this is just journal articles. This doesn't include chapters in books, and it doesn't include books. So it gets even larger. So if you can imagine, we're just one institution putting out, say, 10,000 a year. Can you imagine all the institutions in the world? So this is a pretty big topic that will touch your working desk all the time. So on average, if you're working for a very active PI or a very active lab, they're doing about 20 to 30 papers per year. An emeritus PI, obviously a lot less, but they still try to do several per year. And then your newer investigators, these are the ones you're trying to train up, right? And set them to be doing trying to train them to be doing administrative stuff correctly so they don't get into any bad habits. So these folks are doing about 5 to 10 per year. So you could see the variance between the active and the newer investigators. And so we didn't include postdocs in here or project scientists. So this number is obviously could only grow. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Karen. She's the subject matter expert and the instructional librarian for the biomedical library and the Geisel library. And she could probably introduce herself better than me.
Great. Well, I'm glad to be here, and I'll just echo real quickly something Jill said, and that is if you do have questions on this process, please don't hesitate to contact me. All right, so let's take a look at the scientific literature landscape. Basically, this is to make sure that we're all on the same page about what we mean by certain things. So publications. Scientific results, knowledge are presented and shared to others in the world. Your typical scientific publications would be things like patents, books, presentations at conferences, the proceedings from those conferences, policy briefs, and then this mixed bag of articles, papers, or manuscripts, which is the focus of today's presentation. So what's the difference between all of those different things? And you've probably heard someone say, I just had a paper published. I have an article in this journal. Rarely will you hear the word manuscript, but that is something that we're going to deal with quite a bit today. So I wanted to make sure that we were clear on what we're talking about. Basically, articles and papers are pretty synonymous. They'll be thrown around pretty much the same way and meaning the same thing. And articles and papers, generally written by experts in a particular subject. It is the main vehicle for scholarly communications, particularly in the sciences. It'll contain original research, original thoughts. It might be a short paper on a specific topic. It is published in a journal, sometimes called a periodical. And manuscripts. This is the final stage of the research project. It's the writing of the results, the conclusions. And this is what is submitted to the journal. It's sometimes called a preprint. And that's something you can stick in the back of your mind. It might come in handy for other topics that we're going to talk about. But the manuscript is really what NIH wants, and it wants a specific version of the manuscript, and we'll make that clear in just a minute. So just to make sure that we're all clear on what journals or periodicals are, intended to further the progress of science, it's one of those publications that are an academic tool, and quite often the items in a journal are peer-reviewed. So some of the examples, and you'll probably know these quite well, Nature, American Journal of, in this case, Hypertension, or other 100 zillion things of Journal of something, Journal of Cell Biology. So peer review, what is that? You may have heard of it as refereeing, and this is the process where when that manuscript gets submitted to the publisher, it is then sent to experts in the field, anywhere from 3 to 5, and they will give feedback to the editor on this particular article. Is it a good one? Is it one that should be rejected? Or how can it be improved? Did they have a weak argument in a certain place? Did their graphics communicate what they thought? Could they be enhanced? What did they miss? What should they have included? All of that gets wrapped up and sent back to the authors, and then the authors have a chance to revise things and resubmit that manuscript. So just to do it in sort of a pictorial way and to kind of comment on the places where you might be involved in the process, we'll use the analogy of a baseball game. So home plate, where you start, is oftentimes where you might come into the process, because after the manuscript is written, you might be pulled into the process of helping with inserting citations, especially if you are familiar with citation management tools. you might be helping to format that bibliography as well and get that submitted. So that gets submitted off to the publisher. You're off on first base, and if you were at a baseball game, this would be where you would go get a beer and maybe a hot dog, because this process is going to take a while. And once you get it to the publisher for that editorial review, they'll get an initial confirmation, the authors will, and then it gets sent to the peer reviewer. So you're on to second base at that point in time. Peer feedback is given to the authors, and so then they have a chance to revise or give reasons why they did not include and arrange things for the peer reviewer feedback. So you're hitting close to third base now, and this is another place where you might be involved in that process, because if you helped with the bibliography and inserting citations in the first place, they'll probably come back to you in the second place, because there'll be some revisions to happen. And so anywhere along this process, there could be rejection notices that come. But if you get around third base, the authors have resubmitted it, the journal has accepted it, there's some agreements made happen, and then the publication process. Getting it out formally into the journal, that's all done. So you've made it back home safely, and in a optimistic viewpoint, this whole process could be 3 to 12 months or even longer. And I was just looking at one yesterday where EPUB came out at one point in time, and it did not hit the journal for another 1.5 years. So that can be a very long time. Just to give you an idea of how peer review plays in with that. So what are we really talking about with a manuscript? So that final research process, that preprint idea, and do yourself and your PI a favor, and when you have that preprint and it's submitted off to the publisher, save that version. That's going to be an important version to keep your hands on. As well, the after peer review manuscript is another one to keep hands on, because that's what NIH wants. Sometimes you might hear it as a post-print or a post-peer reviewed manuscript. Make sure you keep a copy of that for working with the compliance factor, as well as other places that it might be. So let's talk for a second about PubMed versus PubMed Central, or PMC. And so PubMed, that's the database. So when you want to go search and see how many publications Dr. So-and-so has published, you might go to PubMed, do an author search, and what you get there are just citations. There's a lot that's there in PubMed. There's about 28 million citations in total. It's also the place where people search the Medline database. That's most of the powerhouse of PubMed. On the other hand, PubMed Central, or because of the confusion with PubMed, I think they're rebranding it as PMC. This is the archive of full text health science articles. That's the archive for NIH as well as some other organizations. And these are all freely available. They're open access. And currently there's about 4.5 million articles in PubMed Central. So there's the idea of public access, open access, and e-scholarship. So NIH is the public access, open access is a publishing model, and e-scholarship is the UC system's archive of UCSD research. And so with public access, NIH has a mandate that once a journal is published, within 12 months, it has to be in PubMed Central. And that's the article or compliance factor. You'll see that on grant reports where things are not in compliance. And so the one thing to remember with public access is the starting point of that 12 months is when it is officially published in the journal. It's not when you might have seen EPUB ahead of print, that sort of thing. That's not when the clock starts ticking. It's when it actually gets formally published, and you could go to a journal and find it in a journal. As I mentioned, open access, that is unrestricted online access to scholarly research. It's a different publication model where the author pays fees for it to be open access. And those fees can actually be covered by grant publications, but you have to plan for it ahead of time. And e-scholarship, as I mentioned, is for the UC campuses. Now there's a whole big part of information with e-scholarship and what that requirement is, and so it's beyond what we can cover today, but that will probably be another training that we'll bring out in the future. But the mandate is that faculty, staff, and students who are employed by the UC system, if they publish peer-reviewed journals or peer-reviewed articles, they need to be uploaded into e-scholarship. So three types of things there. We'll focus on the public access policy and its compliance for today's session. And there's some important caveats with the public access policy about what is required to be in PubMed Central. There's the link to the whole ball of wax for what they're asking for. But the reasons behind the policy is to ensure that the research funding that we have paid for through our tax dollars is made publicly available and not stuck behind paywalls with publishers. It is to advance science and improve human health. And the upshot is that if things are not in compliance, it will affect future funding. Now, grants are approved based on their scientific merit, but if things are not in compliance, that can hold up the funding for grants, and that would not be a good thing. So just to make sure that we're all on board with what actually has to be put into PMC, I borrowed this from one of my colleagues at Michigan. So what are we not talking about? Well, the things that do not go into PMC are dissertations, things that are not peer-reviewed, and things that are not NIH research. And I'll put a little caveat on that. Our handout for the FAQs will give you a little bit of information about the additional organizations, government organizations that are, or that have within the last 3 years bought into putting things into PubMed Central. So I'll comment on those in a little bit. So this little graphic hopefully will help explain things. So if you've written the article and the answer is yes, the article is in compliance, you've got a PMC ID number, you're great, you're done. That's all you have to worry about. If the answer is no, do you have a PMC ID number, or you don't know, then let's look at the box that's down here. So there's 3 pillars that we have to think about. First one is the article peer-reviewed? Was the article a direct result of NIH funding, in part or in whole? And was the article accepted for publication after April 2008? And of course, by now, that's about everything. If the answer to any one of those is no, then the article is exempt. It can be on the My Bibliography, but you can tag it as exempt for one of these reasons. If the answer is yes to all 3 of those, then you have to put that manuscript into PMC. So just another graphic about what we're talking about as far as what the author manuscript is. There could be some miscommunication and misunderstanding about this. Obviously, it's been through the peer review, it's had author changes, and it's that resubmitted manuscript. So basically the dividing line is just before the journal has done some copy editing, some typesetting to make it pretty and look like the PDF that we're used to, and then it's published. And so it's right up until that point is what we're talking about.